What about your setup? How many screens? What kind of keyboard? Is there something interesting? What kind of IDE?
To be completely fair, me and Lex, we share the same keyboard, okay? Him and I, we use the same keyboard, okay? And I'm I'm a monogamous screen user, okay? It's just a fact of how I live my life.
Emacs Vim or something modern, Linux, what operating system, laptop, or any interesting thing that brings you joy?
So I kind of migrated cultures where early on through all of game dev, there was sort of one culture there, which was really quite distinct from the more the Silicon Valley venture,
Right.
culture for things. They're different groups and they have pretty different mores in the way they think about things. And I still do think a lot of the big companies can learn things from the hardcore game development side of things, where it still boggles my mind how hostile to debuggers and IDEs that so much of the kind of big money, get billions of dollars Silicon Valley venture-backed funds are.
Well, that's
Who says anyone's hostile? No one here is hostile towards
interesting. Sorry, so you're saying like big companies like Google and Meta are hostile to?
They are not big on debuggers and IDEs. Like, so much of it is like Emacs
Why?
Vim for things, and we just assume that debuggers don't work most of the time for the systems. And a lot of this comes from a sort of Linux bias on a lot of things, where I did come up through the personal computers and then the DOS and then Windows, and it was Borland tools and then Visual Studio, and
Do you appreciate debuggers?
very much so.
So I do think there is something here that's a little bit, it's just a little out of sync here. Sorry if I'm not trying to be a mean guy here. I'm just slightly correcting John Carmack. I know I shouldn't even do that, but I'm gonna do that. There's also this idea that being able to log and be good at logging to debug and relying on logs to debug is really great for your servers, right? Because that way, when you're off in production, you have a way to be able to turn on the complete and proper set of debugging instrumentation and know exactly what the problem is. And if you're not good and adept at that, you won't know why something is breaking. One of the worst possible solutions in production is when you have to create what's happening, on the server, on your local machine to know why it's breaking. I think that's really, really, really hard. And so to me, that's it's a different problem. It's a different problem, a different scope. And I think a lot of people are used to one way or the other. And I totally get why people like debuggers. People love debuggers. I think a lot of times it also is based on the complexity. Like the stuff that he worked on is vastly different than the stuff I work on. Right? There is no such thing as a shader. The amount of complexity and things that I'm working on is extremely small in comparison. And so is it faster, worse? Is it better? What is it? JavaScript is not like this continuously running debuggable environment like he's talking about. It's not quite the same worlds that that we live in here. But it's interesting, And so a very good thing is to know how to debug what's going wrong in production when you need to. What did he work on? John Carmack, what did he work on? Do you need to get the hell out of the chat, buddy? You need to get out? You want to get the hell out of the startup? Coming at me with that who's John Carmack talk? I'm going to leave this earth. Both feet fly through space, and they're going to land betwixt your shoulders, okay? I'm going to drop kick you if you keep this up. Clean out of the startup.
I mean, a debugger is how you get a view into a system that's too complicated to understand. I mean, anybody that thinks just read the code and think about it, that's an insane statement.
That is an insane statement. You can't just read the code and think about it. There's no way that you can do that. But again, logging is an important aspect of debugging. That's different for different things. Yeah.
You can't even read all the code on a big system. You have to do experiments on the system. And doing that by adding log statements, recompiling, and rerunning it is an incredibly inefficient way of doing it. I mean, yes, you can always get things done, even if you're working with stone knives and, and bear skins. That is the mark of a good programmer, is that given any tools, you will figure out a way to get it done.
I do like my bear skins and my stone knives, sir. But again, it's still very, very different. Like, I don't have like an equal here when it comes to like what I'm developing at Netflix. It's just like not even a thing, right? It's like what he is saying, I can't even like do. You know what I mean? Like, I have to run it. I have to compile it. I have to go. It's always compiling. It's just like a go. And it has to take the input and play it through. So replayability is like a huge part of debugging for me. Like, that's really where I put a lot of my like emphasis on stuff, is in that area.
But it's amazing what you can do with sometimes much, much better tools, where instead of just going through this iterative compile, run, debug cycle, you have the old Lisp direction of like, you've got a REPL and you're working interactively and doing amazing things there. But in many cases, a debugger has a very powerful user interface that can stop, examine all the different things in your program, set all these different breakpoints. And of course, you can do that with GDB or whatever there, but this is one of the user interface fundamental principles, where when something is complicated to do, you won't use it very often. There's people that will break out GDB when they're at their wits' end and they just have beat their head against a problem for so long. But for somebody that kind of grew up in game dev, it's like they were running into the debugger anyways before they even knew there was a problem. And you would just stop and see, what was happening. And sometimes you could fix things even before you did one compile cycle. You could be in the debugger and you'd say, well, I'm just going to change this right here. And yep, that did the job, and fix it and go on.
And for people who don't know,
GDB is cool, though. RGB. GDB is good. I've always wanted to get better and better at GDB, because I feel like that's like the end game of like knowing your stuff. I kind of know it a little bit here, a little bit there. You know what I mean? I'm okay at it. The Grand Dick Debugger? Yes, that's what it stands for.
GDB is a sort of popular, I guess, Linux debugger, primarily for C++.
They handle most of the languages, but okay. It's based on C as the original kind of Unix heritage.
And it's kind of like command line. It's not user friendly. It doesn't allow for clean visualizations. And you're exactly right. So that you're using this kind of debugger usually when you're at wit's end and there's a problem that you can't.
I mean, I agree. It's not as pretty as like the Chrome debugger or IntelliJ's nice debugger. I assume he uses VS Code, or not VS Code, but Visual Studios. And so Visual Studios, I assume, is probably is prettier, right? When they say not friendly, a lot of times what it comes down to is the fact that you can see your changed variables, your stack trace, your code. You have like a lot of options for what you can see. I just don't really have like a huge need for it. You know what I mean?
I figure out why by just looking at the codes. They have to find it. That's how I guess normal programmers use it. But you're saying there should be tools that kind of visualize and help you as part of the programming process, just a normal programming process to understand the code deeper.
Yeah, when I'm working on like my C++ code, I'm always running it from the debugger. I type in the code, I run it. Many times the first thing I do after writing code is set a breakpoint and step through the function. Now, other people will say it's like, oh, I do that in my head. Well, your head is a faulty interpreter of all those things there. And I've written brand new code. I want to step in there and I'm going to single step through that, examine lots of things and see if it's actually doing what I expected it to.
It is a kind of companion, the debugger. Like you're now coding in an interactive way with another being. The debugger is a kind of dumb being, but it's a reliable being. That is an interesting question of what role does AI play in that kind of.
I think this is pre-Chat GPT 3, right? Yeah. So a lot of times whenever I'm doing something, this is kind of an interesting take also here, which is whenever I'm programming any sufficiently complicated function, anything that's really kind of difficult for me to be able to do first try. So I think of like a classic example is like, how do you CSV generation. It's not an easy problem. It's not an easy problem to create a CSV. And so with that in mind, when I'm doing my stuff, I'm going to create unit tests around that and program against it, right? And so as I create the whole thing, I then create a unit test, make sure that I've done the happy path correct, think of one or two things that aren't good, and program against that. And as something breaks, inevitably, I use that as a mechanism for remembering that this thing broke this way, or even more so, I will sometimes use unit tests as a way to develop when it's just too complicated to try to run that thing any other way. Now, some people might call this TDD, but it's not quite TDD because I've finished the implementation and I'm just using it as a way to validate and test it quickly. And then I delete that test often because it's just me using it in various ways. And then I try to formulate a test that's more reasonable. You know what I mean? Yes, 2020 BC before the new BC is now moved all the way to 2020.
With codecs and these kind of ability to generate code, you might start having tools that understand the code in interesting, deep ways that can work with you.
Because there's a whole spectrum there from static code analyzers and various kind of dynamic tools there up to AI that can conceivably grok these programs that literally no human can understand. They're too big, too intertwined, and too interconnected, but it's not beyond the possibility of understanding. It's just beyond what we can hold in our heads as kind of mutable state while we're working on things. And I'm a big proponent, again, of things like static analyzers and some of that stuff where you'll find some people that don't like being scolded by a program for how they've written something, where it's like, oh, I know better. And sometimes you do.
It's called Rust, okay? That's why we all use Rust, all right? We all use Rust because we're not sadomasochists. We're actually people that we want strong static, analysis. I know better that I'm not that smart. And by the way, I just have to be able to figure out any way I can bring in Rust into this, okay? I just have to know, like this is one of those moments. This is a clear moment. I saw the opportunity. I brought it in.
But that was something that it was very, very valuable for me when, and not too many people get an opportunity like this to have. This is almost one of those spiritual experiences as a programmer, an awakening to the id software code bases were a couple million lines of code. And at one point I had used a few of the different analysis tools, but I made a point to really go through and scrub the code base using every tool that I could find. And it was eye-opening, where we had a reputation for having some of the most robust, strongest code, where there were some, great things that I remember hearing.
That's a great reputation. Like, who wouldn't want that? Like, how would you like to know that when people use your code or use your stuff, that the way they say it is, oh, that's like the best code out there. Like, if I'm going to have to integrate with anybody, I want to integrate with that guy. Like, that should be like a hashtag goal for everyone. I love that. That's what I want in my life. I want more of that.
From like Microsoft telling us about crashes on Xbox, and we had this tiny number that they said were probably literally hardware errors. And then you have other significant titles that just have millions of faults that are getting recorded all the time. So I was proud of our code on a lot of levels, but when I took this code analysis squeegee through everything, it was shocking how many errors there were in there. Things that you can say, okay, this was a copy paste, not changing something right here. Lots of things that were, the most common problem was something in a printf format string that was the wrong data type that could cause crashes there. And
that I have print myself way too many times in my lifetime to dang, it gets me.
You really want the warnings for things like that. Then the next most common was missing a check for null that could actually happen, that could blow things up. And those are obviously like top C++ things. Everybody has those problems. But the long tail of all of the different little things that could go wrong there, and we had good programmers in my own code, stuff that I'd be looking at. It's like, oh, I wrote that code. That's definitely wrong. We've been using this for a year, and it's this submarine, this mine sitting there waiting for us to step on. And it was humbling. It was, and I reached the conclusion that anything that can be syntactically allowed in your language, if it's going to show up eventually in a large enough code base. You're not going to, good intentions aren't going to keep it from happening. You need automated tools and guardrails for things. And those.
I like this take a lot. Like, I know we'll probably disagree on the debugger thing, or really, I don't even think we disagree. I think we're just in different environments. It's just like not really an option, a lot of the things he's talking about for me to run. But this idea of being able to run additional tooling on top of your code to say that you are correct, that's why I've said multiple times, this new like Copilot X thing coming up, the fact that it does not have hey, these could be problems in your code blows my mind, right? Like that is, they've integrated it with GitHub and they do like unit test generation. I don't want it writing unit tests. I want to really think about my unit tests. I don't want to generate just crap. I don't want it to alert me that I don't have enough testing. I want it to tell me where have I messed up that's not caught by the language, like something my own dumb self has done, right? Like to me, that is like the greatest possible use of AI in programming. And that's like the one they're not doing. That is the best thing. It blows me away. Honestly, it blows me away.
Start with things like static types or even type hints in the more dynamic languages, but the people that rebel against that basically say that slows me down doing that. There's something to that. I get that. I've written, I've cobbled things together in a notebook. I'm like, wow, this is great that it just happened. But yeah, that's kind of sketchy, but it's working fine. I don't care. It does come back to that value analysis where sometimes it's right to not care. But when you do care, if it's going to be something that's going to live for years and is going to have other people working on it, and it's going to be deployed to millions of people, then you want to use all of these tools. You want to be told, it's like, no, you've screwed up here, here, and here. And that does require kind of an ego check about things where you have to be open to the fact that everything that you're doing is just littered with flaws. It's not that, oh, you occasionally have a bad day. It's just whatever stream of code you output, there's going to be a statistical regularity of things that you just make mistakes on.
Feels good too, doesn't it? Oh man, especially like right now I'm kind of having what we've jokingly referred to as like, it's just like my tool's kind of being used a bunch at my job now, my latest tool. And a lot of people are using it. And dude, I get like 1 or 2 reports a day like, hey, it doesn't work this way. Hey, this thing broke it. Hey, this one thing you didn't expect, this output from the server. Because I'm hobbling together like 7 different services to do output. And dude, I just get bamboozled by all sorts of things I didn't know existed, right? Just constantly.
And I do think there's the whole argument about test-driven design and unit testing versus kind of analysis and different things. I am more in favor of the analysis and the stuff that just like you can't run your program until you fix this, rather than you can run it.
By the way, that was obviously a Rust reference. Clearly, that was a Rust reference. Okay, I know he may not admit it out loud no matter what, but we all know.
And hopefully a unit test will catch it in some way.
Yeah, in my private code, I have asserts everywhere.
Yeah.
There's something pleasurable to me about sort of the dictatorial rule of like, this should be true at this point. And too many times I've made mistakes that shouldn't have been made. And I would assume I wouldn't be the kind of person that would make that mistake, but I keep making that mistake. Therefore, an assert really catches me, really helps all the time. So my code, I would say like 10 to 20% of my private code just for personal use is probably asserts.
And they're active.
I do like that. I really do feel like I need to try using more asserts. I don't really assert. Like I do feel like there's something to that just seems like such a good move, and yet I don't do it. You're going to assert these nuts? Where are you going to assert them at?
Comments. And it's one of those things that in theory, they don't make any difference to the program. And if it was all operating the way you expected it would be, then they will never fire. But even if you have it right and you wrote the code right initially, then circumstances change. The world outside your program changes. And in fact, that's one of the things where I'm kind of fond in a lot of cases of static array size declarations, where I went through this period where it's like, okay, now we have general collection classes. We should just make everything variable. Because I had this history of, in the early days, you get Doom, which had some fixed limits on it. Then everybody started making crazier and crazier things, and they kept bumping up the different limits, this many lines, this many sectors. And it seemed like a good idea. Well, we should just make this completely generic. It can go up to whatever. And there's cases where that's the right thing to do, but it also, the other aspect of the world changing around you is it's good to be informed when the world has changed more than you thought it would. And if you've got a continuously growing collection, you're never going to find out. You might have this quadratic.
That's a really good, it is very interesting, right? Like to be able to always define your bounds. Like what can something not exceed? And if it's exceeding it, why is it exceeding it? This video is in 1.25.
Slow down on something where you thought, oh, I'm only ever going to have a handful of these, but something changes and there's a new design style and all of a sudden you've got 10,000 of them. So I kind of like, in many cases, picking a number, some nice round power of 2 number, and setting it up in there and having an assert saying it's like, hey, you hit this limit. You should probably think, are the choices that you've made around all of this still relevant if somebody's using 10 times more than you thought they would?
Yeah, this code was originally written with this kind of worldview, with this kind of set of constraints. You were thinking of the world in this way. If something breaks, that means you got to rethink the initial stuff, and it's nice for it to do that. Is there any stuff like keyboard or?
I wonder how well that works in the web world, right? Like you can't assert things in production, but you need a way to be able to run enough things to be able to know that, because right, like you can't just explode you can't just take down your servers. It's interesting.
Monitors.
I'm fairly pedestrian on a lot of that, where I did move to triple monitors like in the last several years ago. I had been dual monitor for a very long time, and it was one of those things where probably years later than I should have, I'm just like, well, the video cards now generally have 3 output ports. I should just put the third monitor up there. That's been a pure win. I've been very happy with that. But no, I don't have fancy keyboard or mouse or anything really.
The key things is an IDE that has.
I always feel like that argument for multiple monitors, it always just comes down to one thing. How efficient are you at moving within your operating system? For me, I'm a one monitor person. I will always probably be a one monitor person because it's just a single key press to do that, which for me, it feels easier than looking somewhere else, focusing, getting the point, and doing, and using it the same way. I'd rather just do this because for me, that's easy. I don't know. I've always been a one monitor kind of person. I have 2 computers. I only have a second computer because I stream. It's not because I have 2 computers. When I'm at my day job, I'm just doing that, and I just play my music right here. I'm on YouTube, doing whatever on YouTube. There we go. This is fantastic. And then when I'm done, I'm just right back here. I'm just working. And when I want to change something, I just hop back over to it. i3, yeah, I know a window manager is really good. A window manager is really, really good. And I think people sleep on how good a window manager is.
Helpful debuggers, has helpful tools. So it's not the Emacs Vim route and then Diet Coke.
Yeah. So I did spend, I spent one of my week-long retreats where I'm like, okay, I'm going to make myself use, it was actually classic VI, which I know people will say you should never have done that. You should have just used Vim directly.
Used Vim,
but,
yeah.
I gave it the good try. It's like, okay, I'm being in kind of classic Unix development.
Should have went with Vim. VI is too old. It's not quite. It misses a lot of good motions, is why I don't really like VI. There's a lot of motions and ways you can manipulate text that are just so much better with Vim.
Developer mode here, and
I use
I worked for a week on it. I used Anki to teach myself the different little key combinations for things like that.
Right.
And in the end, it was just like, all right, this was kind of like my Civil War reenactment phase. It's like I'm going out there doing it like they used to in the old days, and it was kind of fun in that regard.
So many people right now,
but
they're screaming as they're listening to this.
So again, the out is that this was not.
Yeah, I mean, I am offended, okay? I am genuinely offended, okay? I don't program in the oldie days, okay? I like Tmux. I want to use Tmux because I think it's just the best. The fact that I can do that, this is fantastic. To be able to jump in here and just hit that chat stack, right? Like, look how good that was, okay? To be able to go back here and go to that cargo chatter that we're building, right? The ability to swap between these 2 projects with, just...
modern Vim, but still, yes, I was very happy to get back to my Visual Studio at the end.
Yeah, I struggle with this a lot because I use a Kinesis keyboard and I use Emacs primarily. And I feel like I can, exactly as you said, I can understand the code, I can navigate the code. There's a lot of stuff you could build within Emacs with using Lisp. You can customize a lot of things for yourself to help you introspect the code, like to help you understand the code and visualize different aspects of the code. You can even run debuggers, but it's work. And the world moves past you, and the better and better ideas are constantly being built, and that puts a kind of. I need to take the same kind of retreat as you're talking about, but now I'm still fighting the Civil War. I need to kind of move.
So I did do it. You guys saw it. I did a week long in VS Code, right? I decided to lay down my musket and try out one of these new fancy Armalite rifle platforms. It was horseshit. Solid. Yeah, I spent a lot of time setting up VS Code. It just works. No, it actually doesn't. You got to set up quite a few things. And then you're playing this game of finding options, and all the options are crazy to find, just like Vim, except for it's just not quite the same, It's just not quite the same.
Into the 21st century.
And it does seem like the world is, or a large chunk of the world is moving towards Visual Studio Code, which is kind of interesting to me. Again, it's the JavaScript ecosystem on the one hand.
I used Harpoon, and I did use Harpoon, by the way. I used Harpoon in VS Code. I was using it. I was loving it, okay? I still hate it.
And IDEs are one of those things that you want to be infinitely fast. You want them to just kind of immediately respond. And heck, there's someone I know, I'm an old school game dev guy that still uses Visual Studio 6. And on a modern computer, everything is just absolutely instant on something like that because it was made to work on a computer that's 10,000 or 100,000.
This is why I like using Vim right here. This is the statement. That's why I like it, is because I don't want to have to be in here and having to play this game of like, why isn't my stuff loading? Why is my LSP taking so dang long? Like, I just want things to feel really crispy. You know what I mean? That's why I use it, because I don't like that feeling that VS Code gives me. It just drives me nuts. I am
1,000 times slower. So
I am a glutton for performance. I love it.
just everything happens immediately, and all the modern systems just feel, they feel so crufty when it's like, oh, why is this refreshing the screen and moving around and updating over here and something blinks down there and you should update this. And there's, there are things that we've lost with that incredible flexibility, but lots of people get tons of value from it. And I am super happy that that seems to be winning over even a lot of the old Vim and Emacs people, that they're kind of like, hey, Visual Studio Code's maybe, not so bad. That may be the final peacekeeping solution where everybody.
I would rather use Visual Studio. Real talk, I'd rather use Visual Studio. If you said, hey, do you want to use Visual Studio or VS Code? I would rather use Visual Studio. I'd rather use IntelliJ. At least IntelliJ, it takes like a minute to start up. It has to go crunch some indices for a while. It takes a long time to get set up, but once it's there, IntelliJ is fast. But it has to do a bunch of crunching. But at least after it's crunched, it is fast. And to me, that is really important, is that I want that smooth feeling. I want all that stuff. You don't get that with VS Code ever. It just never feels fast.
He is reasonably happy with something like that.
IntelliJ is good. I used IntelliJ for 2 years. I really tried to love and learn IntelliJ, and I really did. I used it for quite some time. And then I moved over. I did Visual Studio. I've done IntelliJ, Sublime, VS Code, Atom, Vim, NeoVim, Emacs, DoomMax, SpaceMax. I've tried so many gosh dang editors. You know what I mean? I've tried so many. IntelliJ's tooling is absolutely great. Yeah, it is very, very good. IntelliJ is really good.